Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the small Triumph Sports Library and Archives. Before we get to the subject matter of this week's episode, I thought I would briefly address my unplanned hiatus from video production. The primary reason is because about every 2 to 3 years, when pollen season starts here in South Carolina, I get walloped. And I spend about 7 to 10 days extremely congested and struggling to get through daily life. And that's something that happened recently. Also, things have been pretty busy at work, but I also have taken the opportunity to kind of reflect on my video production process. I'm not embarrassed by the videos I've posted so far, but I am nagged by the sense that they could be better if I took a little more time in the preparation and production, and especially picked up the video editing skills that I need to pick up to make a better product. And really, there's no reason for me to be rushing out videos. I'm not going to have a tremendously large audience. I'm never going to be a YouTube influencer or anything like that. So I've sort of decided that I wanted to kind of slow down production a little bit to improve the quality. So far I've been recording videos and then reviewing them and thinking that'll suffice, and then posting the video. And I'd really like to get the that will suffice moved over into the category of I feel pretty good about that before I post things. So I've been away from video production for a few weeks, but I'm going to produce this video, which is not going to be probably markedly better than anything that has come before, but I am committed to making the videos better in the future. This particular episode is about the paint code for my 1980 Triumph Spitfire 1500. I got this car in June of 1991. I immediately began kind of cleaning it up and refreshing it, doing a lot of the small work that needed to be done to make it a daily driver. But I also had an eye toward restoring it. At the time, I was a college kid, didn't have a lot of money, didn't have access to a lot of resources, but certainly one of the first things that you think about when you acquire a classic car and you notice its imperfections is you start to think about what to do in terms of cleaning up the paint. There are inevitably paint chips, there are inevitably little issues that have to be dealt with. And so with the car, I noticed on the commission plate, which really, even though it says commission number on it, by that stage was really a VIN plate, because for the very late Spitfire 1500s, the standardized VIN number was being used. But regardless, I noticed on the VIN plate a paint code, but it ended up not being very helpful with the resources that I had available to me. Again, this was the summer of 1991. This is the car in question. As you can see, it is a white car, and the commission plate on it has the paint code listed as NCG. That's useful information, so naturally I went to the resources I had on hand to try to figure out what paint code NCG is. I did not have a lot of success with this. This is the pre-internet age. The thing that I mainly had available to me were catalogs from the vendors I had immediately started using when I got the car. Here is a photograph of a catalog by the Roadster factory. It actually is a reproduction of the paint codes that are in the February 1981 edition of the Spitfire 1500 factory parts catalog. But you'll notice that bottom line for whites down there at the bottom, there is no code NCG. So this was obviously confusing to me. One of the first books I got on Spitfires that included history and information about how to restore the car and what was period correct for the car. It's John Thomason's Spitfire and GT6 Guide to Originality, which I've discussed in a previous video. That actually has a page in it with color chips, paint chips in it of the different Spitfire factory colors. But again, no NCG in there whatsoever. So I was kind of at a loss. I subsequently required the 1980 US brochure for the Triumph Spitfire, which, by the way, is one of the cheesiest brochures ever made. There's a website on the internet that actually hosts scans of a variety of brochures, and as I recall, the person responsible for the website ruthlessly mocks this brochure for being incredibly cheesy, and it's a fair characterization of the brochure, but it does have some nice pictures in it. It also has information about the color choices, and you'll notice while a lot of the famous Triumph paint colors are listed, Brooklyn's green, carmine, vermilion, Inca yellow, russet brown, paget blue, for the white color it simply says white, which is not incredibly useful. And again, nothing in there helped me with my NCG paint code. Fast forward to the internet age, I did some initial research on this paint code, specifically in the context of the Spitfire 1500, and it came up empty time and time again. A little bit later on, I think I searched more broadly, British Leyland and Triumph colors, and that's when I finally came up with some information for NCG. I don't remember where I initially found it. I do know at some point it was added to the Spitfire and GT6 websites database. So here are the paint colors from 1977 to 1980. And you can see down here finally on the chart we have NCG, which is listed as porcelain white. So finally I had the information that I was looking for. NCG as a paint code stood for porcelain white. Useful information. It was incredibly difficult to get that information, especially before the internet. I have subsequently collected a lot of Triumph Spitfire and GT6 related titles. I have a growing library. Really none of those books reference porcelain white when they talk about the various paint colors that were available for Spitfire. So that is in and of itself interesting. Then during the COVID lockdowns, I discovered for sale a late Triumph paint and trim colors brochure. I really like, by the way, the design of this brochure, and this was published, as you may be able to see there at the bottom, in February of 1980, which is kind of neat because my car was produced in February of 1980. And on this brochure we actually have porcelain white for the body color options for the Spitfire. Again, this published in February of 1980. Porcelain white is given as a color option, and more important, we actually have a color chip for porcelain white, which is a slightly gray white color. What's interesting about this color chip is when I compare it with the actual body of my Spitfire, it's not even a remotely close match, which you would expect for the outer parts of the car that have been exposed to a lot of UV light, but even some of the hidden parts of the car doesn't exactly match. I do know that my white color has kind of a gray tone to it it is not, or does not seem to be quite as dark as the color chip, but the color chips are not necessarily perfect in and of themselves. It's also possible that the car got a paint code that was slightly different from the actual paint that was on it. Things were probably being done in a little bit of a sloppy manner by Triumph there at the very end. Speaking of which, I did eventually get the BMHIT certificate for my Spitfire, and one interesting thing that became obvious is that the record keeping by Triumph at the end really fell off. The certificate for my 1969 GT6 Plus includes a lot of interesting information, including the ship on which it was carried over to the United States and things like that. The certificate for my 1980 Spitfire has a lot of lines that say not recorded. So you'll notice my heritage certificate says color exterior not recorded. So the heritage certificate would not have been at all helpful in that regard. The certificate is really only useful for a couple of things. It does seem to have the trunk key code on it. It does establish all of the accessories, options that the car originally came with, but it does have quite a few lines on it that say not recorded. So the basic moral of the story there is probably an obvious one, which is we're really blessed to live in the internet age where we can access a lot of information very quickly. I'm sure there are quite a few folks out there who remember the old days when you had to get your hands on a book. It was actually pretty crippling as a college student because I wanted more information on my car, but getting my hands on the books generally meant buying them. They weren't likely to be, those kind of niche books weren't likely to be at the local library, so you had to buy them and they were expensive, and so it really limited what you could do easily, what kind of information you could access easily. But once the internet became a thing and people started using it and people started posting more and more information, it obviously became much easier to get information, and the networking, the ability to ask large groups of people questions and compare notes, compare information, compare what came with the cars and what the cars looked like and things like that. It's just a true boon, and that's a rather obvious point to make. But this story is important to me because that paint code drove me nuts for quite a few years. Maybe if I'd been a little more resourceful or thought a little bit differently about the tactics for finding out what that actual paint code stood for in terms of paint color, I might have gotten the information that I wanted faster. But as it was a pretty maddening problem for a little while until eventually, boom, through a little bit of changes in strategy, I was able to find the information on the internet. And then, of course, I was able to add additional information through searches and acquiring the brochure I mentioned and other such things. Hopefully that is of some interest to some of you out there. I wanted to tell this story because it was a problem that nagged me for a long time, and also, in telling the story, I had the opportunity to highlight the late Triumph paint and trim colors brochure, some of the deficiencies in heritage certificates for late cars and things like that might be useful for some of you to know. The overall moral of the story, of course, is obvious, which is that we are fortunate to live in the internet age. The internet has obviously been with us for a while, though, and it's human nature to start to take things for granted. So maybe it's nice to stop and reflect, if only briefly, about the challenges of research in the pre-internet age. I do have another video in progress, and I'm going to try to get posted within the next couple of weeks. But thank you for watching this video, and I hope to be back with another much sooner than later. So thank you.